We claim we don't want Iran to have a bomb. We're giving them every reason in the world to do that. They're not willing to completely disarm and become totally vulnerable, because we've seen what happens with Libya, with Syria, and they are definitely not going to be third on that list. There's too much easy talk in the West about how we will destroy their ability to launch missiles. Like that's an afternoon operation. This is an incredibly difficult task to get done. There is a lot of damage they can do to Israel. There's a lot of damage they can do to the Americans. In Iran's calculation, our launching of the operation is itself the escalation. And so now then it's game on. Within a few months, they could have enough material for 3 or 4 nuclear warheads. And it could be that you're in the middle of this campaign, you're in the middle of this bombing, and then all of a sudden we see a seismic event. There is zero potential upside in launching anything. The end result, no matter what, would never be better than what it is right now. And the cost to get there could be really, really high, both blood and treasure. God help us if we go down that path.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today I'm joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, who's a retired Army Senior Fellow at Defense Priorities. He has a master's degree in international relations and served 21 years with deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He's obviously become known for publicly challenging official quote-unquote progress claims in Afghanistan, and now he hosts the Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube, where he offers up alternative points of view and often critiques U.S. foreign policy. Daniel, thanks for coming aboard today. How are you doing?
My pleasure for being here. Thanks for having me.
So at the time of making this video, talks are currently underway in Geneva. The first round of talks don't look that good, in that I believe the demands of the United States are that Iran destroy all 3 nuclear sites, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, deliver all enriched uranium to the United States, no sunset clauses, which essentially means that the deal would be indefinite, zero enrichment, but Iran can keep their reactor, and minimal sanctions relief up front. And it seems as though Iran, at least thus far, has categorically rejected the suspension of its enrichment, dismantling of its facilities, as well as the transfer of the highly enriched uranium to the United States. And I'm looking at the price of oil. It was down almost to 63. Now it's bouncing back up again. What is your take on the status of these negotiations? Is this just a stalling tactic? Are both sides just temporizing, awaiting the inevitable? Or do you think that there is some prospect for peace here?
I will say that there is the desire for at least the avoidance of war. I don't know that we could go so far as to say peace. I'm not sure that that's even on the table for a possibility in the near term, but avoiding war is, because I think President Trump desires to avoid war. We'll put it that way. Definitely the Iranian side desires to avoid war. So with that potential common ground, there is some minuscule hope. That's probably as much as I would give it, because while President Trump desires to avoid a war, he apparently desires to have a strike. He wants to look tough. He wants to do something to harm Iran, to keep some people happy. It's irrational to me, because what would a strike accomplish? But there's already being floated around in public that, well, maybe he could just have a strong message and just, try to give them more incentive to do what he wants. But last night, to your bigger question, in my view, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, just almost put the final nail in the coffin when he said that there doesn't seem to be very much opportunity for it. And then he hammered home not just the nuclear stuff that you mentioned, but also the long-range missiles. I mean, he went to some lengths to really drive home the danger to America that they're building a long-range missile that's ICBM to try and reach the United States, something for which I've not seen any actual evidence for. I don't know if they are or not, but the idea is that he's saying the mere existence of that missile capacity equals existential threat to the United States. Therefore, we have to go and destroy them, or we have to get them to give away all those things. So given what you said, that the Iranian side has categorically said, yeah, we're not doing a lot of those things. We're only willing to do this, but we're willing to do that. Yeah, the nuclear enrichment capacity portion, they're happy to prove that they're not pursuing a nuclear weapon, because they aren't, according to them. And they say they're willing to prove that, but they're not willing to completely disarm and become totally vulnerable, because we've seen what happens when that happens with Libya. We've seen what that happens with Syria, and they are definitely not going to be third on that list. So if we really require everything or it's war, then we almost by default make the situation to where there will be war.
It seems like they've set up the parameters such that they will move the goalpost, even if by some stroke of luck Iran agrees to all these terms. They obviously can never, as you say, agree to their only means of defense or leverage, which is long-range or even short-range missiles now. At one point, Rubio talking about short-range missiles, that wasn't even in the equation. So he introduced an even greater demand yesterday, which even caught me off guard, saying that these shorter-range missiles put a lot of the U.S. military bases potentially at risk. So it seems as though the inertia is moving in a direction which is unstoppable at this point, unfortunately. And like you say, there's going to be likely some kinetic action. How do you envision this playing out? We don't obviously know all of the asymmetrical tricks that they have up their sleeve. You know, we've seen in the last couple of years. If there's one thing that you can say for this administration is that they have a lot of, potential deceitful tactics that they've employed, be it pager-style attacks or even the initiation of the 12-day war. We've seen how they caught the Iranians off guard. And in many respects, it seems like they have some very unorthodox methods. Should we just expect what exactly this looks like, which is a standoff, massive shock and awe type strike, or could there be an X factor here?
I assume there's going to be some kind of an X factor, but the problem is, because of all the things that especially the Israeli side did in the 2025 war, your options are now limited, because once you do something like that catches people off guard. Once the Israelis did the whole pager thing with Hezbollah in Lebanon, that's pretty much off the table now. Everybody's paying attention to that. Once they had the guys on the ground with drones, etc. Prior to the June 2025 war. I won't say that's eliminated, but it's much, much more reduced, because Iran is now looking for it. So in the areas where they have their missile batteries, where they have their offensive launchers, their mobile launchers, et cetera, they're going to be, on the lookout for that. So they're very cognizant of those kinds of threats. That's not to say that Israel or the United States couldn't come up with something new, a new X factor. I almost expect that they would. I doubt that they would just come in just totally conventional. Who knows what that's going to be? But it's just like those at the time in 2025 had a marginal effect at the beginning, and it had almost no effect on the war. Any kind of an X factor here won't have a decisive impact either. It will just be a tactical action of some sort that may give a slight advantage here. But the bigger issue is going to be, just like it was in 2025, who has the bigger stomach to fight, and who has the bigger willingness to suffer. And I think in the last one, despite all the heroics that were claimed and all the chest beating that was claimed on the Western side, I think it was pretty clear that the Israeli side blinked, because they had a lot more to lose by that war going on than the Iranian side did. Both sides suffered a lot during the war. Both sides had strikes that penetrated their air defenses and caused lots of damage. I think more people were killed in Iran than it was in Israel, but Israel was taking a lot of hits, and because of their much more modern infrastructure, they had a lot more to lose. So when they realized that the longer the war went on, the greater the percentage of Iranian missiles that were getting through the integrated air defenses, I think they said, we need to pull this thing to an end real quick and figure this out. So that's why they did that. Well, in the interim, I'm sure that Israel is trying to fill in some gaps. But look, the technology isn't going to change in 6-8 months. So it's still the same as it was then. And we know that the Iranian had learned from that. That's the other downside for having done this last year, is that the Iranians were able to learn how to defeat our air defense systems. And so now then they're going to have missiles that will pick probably up where they left off last time, and now then they've got more of them. So there is a lot of damage they can do to Israel, and there's a lot of damage they can do to the Americans in the region as well. So if we go in there, we have to be cognizant that the likelihood is that Iran will do what it claims and what it's threatened, which is any strike of any type equals a full-out war with them, and they're going to attack the United States and Israel and some of the other regimes in the region, as a matter of fact. So they're saying, look, this is going to, everybody's going to pay for this. And then you mentioned the price of oil a minute ago. Whatever it is right now as we're talking here, just imagine what it's going to be if the Strait of Hormuz gets shut down, because now then you've got a whole big monkey wrench thrown into that cog, and I don't have to tell you what that's going to mean.
Yeah, it seems like the objective would have to be to demilitarize Iran. If they were to embark on any sort of kinetic action, it would be to try to take out their capability to launch ballistic missiles as well as their nuclear facilities. Do you think that is really the only feasible objective here? Or do the objective with respect to regime change, as they call it, is that something that is potentially plausible?
You know, there has been lots of media reports about these so-called missile cities, underground missile cities that Iran has. Iran itself has released a lot of videos that show a lot of these underground bunkers that they have. And I mean, these things are literally underground cities. Some of these videos just show trucks driving just endlessly down hundreds of meters of tunnels in one particular area where they are just stocked full of all kinds of missiles, air defense capacity, drones, I mean, you name it. I mean, and they have manufacturing facilities. They are prepared for exactly this kind of onslaught. They have prepared for decades to expect some kind of a large-scale bombing campaign and missile campaign from the United States and Israel and the West at large, and they are prepared to weather that storm. That's why I say it's going to depend on who's got the big stomach for suffering, because we can blow up a lot of stuff on the surface. But just like with the Israelis didn't know where all the tunnels were in Hamas in the Gaza Strip, we don't know where all the tunnels are in the Iranian side. We don't. I'm sure we know where some of them are. We probably know where most, if not all, the entrances are, or at least a lot of them. And you can gum that works up there, but you can't destroy these. I mean, these things are massive, and it would take an enormous amount of ordnance and pinpoint accuracy and knowledge, and it would require no air defense on the Iranian side, and it appears that they do have some ability to move things around, etc. All the time you're trying to do this, and this is one thing that has to understand. There's too much easy talk in the West, especially the United States, about how we will destroy their ability to launch missiles and will destroy their offensive missile capacity. Like that's an afternoon operation or something like that. This is an incredibly difficult task to get done. It will require profound amounts of ammunition and an almost complete ownership of the skies, and that I'm not sure we can get done to the level we need. They do have, the Iranians have the capacity to shoot down our aircraft, to intercept some of the missiles, etc. And if you don't get them all, then they're going to continue to be firing. They have mobile launchers. So wherever you think the fixed sites are, wherever you know those are, there's also mobile sites that you don't know about that can move around. And we have shown through the Houthis and through previous iterations in other wars in the Middle East, getting mobile launchers is a really, really difficult task. We have a lot of air power in the region, but it's not unlimited, and it also it requires enormous amounts of maintenance. For example, there's somewhere around 200 fighter aircraft of all the various types out there. And, you know, you can go in with this big shock and all kind of first day where, like, basically everybody's in the air, then you can maybe get 2 or 3 iterations of that, but then you have to start doing maintenance. And for every hour of flight time, you have to have 7 to 8 hours of heavy maintenance time. So that means that you can get them all in the air for a while, but now all of a sudden you can't keep them in at that same rate. So you're going to have to start keeping them on the ground, doing maintenance, hoping that you can get everything fixed at a right time. If you got something goes down, it could be days before you get some of that stuff in there. You have the issue of the missiles inventories that we have. How many do we have? How many can we sustain? How long can this go? If we don't have a quick end, if this drags on past a week or 2 weeks, how many missiles do we have to give? And what if they're not accomplishing that? What if the Iranian side is prepared and they could absorb missiles all day long for weeks because they're underground and they're spread out to the 4 winds, and all the time we're doing this, we're suffering casualties in Israel, in Qatar, in Bahrain, all these places that we have people, and we can't stop them. We can't knock out all their offensive missiles. That's going to start to be a major, major problem for Israel and for the United States domestically in political if you can't knock this out. And so I think that this is a much, much harder military operation than anybody in the West. And I'm talking about the White House seems to realize this is. And even though you have this amazing amount of naval and air power, because you don't have any ground power, this is not like Desert Storm or Operation Iraqi Freedom, where we had that air power and a ground component so that you could threaten them, so that the tunnels alone wouldn't be enough. Thank God we're not talking about that. But because you're trying to get it done with only half of the equation, the chances of coming to the right answer are pretty damn low.
So I was going to ask you, how do you think this compares? I mean, you did tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, which are, I guess, if you blend those two together, you can kind of somewhat approximate the topography of Iran, although it's a far more formidable feat to overcome, especially seeing as it's very mountainous, even more so than Afghanistan, I think. And then, of course, you're dealing with a larger, more established military. Could that, though, be a bit of an Achilles heel for the Iranians, that centralized method of control versus, what you were fighting in Afghanistan, which was a little bit more of a guerrilla style warfare, and the insurgency in Iraq, which I presume was also a bit more decentralized? How do you think this would differ from those wars?
Yeah, the Iranian side has been talking about openly. They expressly are not going to be centralized. To the contrary, I think in part because of what happened last year, they realized some of the vulnerabilities that they have, and now then they have, and this is public, that they have announced that they have a decentralized condition to the extent that if you lose communication with the headquarters, whichever headquarters it is, here are your instructions. With no information, with no knowledge, here's what you can do. Here are your requirements, so that they don't get into a situation like that. So you go in, you knock out command and control, and that's certainly going to limit what they can do. But if they already have a plan for that, and they already have an execution plan, so like if a given battalion or a given air defense or air offensive missile battery of some sort says, okay, well, we've lost communication with the headquarters, execute plan A. Now it's time to execute this contingency plan, fire the missiles. They already know where they're going to go. So that will continue on even if not, and then that gives them time to try and reestablish communications. That happened to an extent in the 2025 operation, where we were able to really knock out a lot of their columns. We had some cyber attacks, et cetera, and they lost communications, but then they figured it out within about 12 or so hours, and they started getting that reestablished. I think they would plan to do that again, but they have a plan for that. They have a contingency of continuity of government plan. So if a commander falls, there's another one ready to go. If the Ayatollah himself is assassinated, there's other people ready to step in. If the president gets killed, there's other people ready. And if that one gets killed, there's another one ready. They have thought this through, and they have a lot of contingency plans. But again, I can't stress enough, these underground facilities that they have are extensive and very, very difficult to even find, much less knock out. And I think they can endure this for a very long time.
And so is there a possibility with these contingency protocols and these individual districts acting autonomously that they could potentially run up the escalation ladder in a way that is not preferable to the government there, in that we could see a kill chain progress to the extent that first it's attacks on military bases and the nuclear facilities, but then you cross the threshold into those critical infrastructural targets, which really opens up a whole can of worms in terms of targeting like oil refineries, ports. How do you think they make the jump from the counter force targeting to the counter value targeting?
Well, it appears to me, from what I can piece together and just imagine from my basic military knowledge and study of history, is that if we launch this time, the Iranians seem to believe, and I think with some justification, that it's an existential threat, that we're going for regime change. We're not just going for a punishing thing. We're not just going to take away a capability. It's regime change. So they have no incentive to withhold anything. So these contingency plans I'm talking about, where if they lose communication, they launch out there, that's already thought through. So you talk about the escalation ladder. I think in Iran's calculation, our launching of the operation is itself the escalation. And so now then it's game on. It's full on. according to this definition, in which case they've already selected these targets. They've already given it thought. So there won't be any unintentional escalation. There will be intentional escalation. They will seek to cause real pain to Israel and the United States in order to reestablish deterrence in their terminology. So I think that they would still be willing to stop the war going on if the United States and Israel are agreeing to stop, again, like they did in the 12-day war, because it is not in their interest, because they can't just, if this gets into a war of attrition that can last, half a year, 2 years, 3 years, something like that, then Iran can't win that. Because they can't get that much ammunition. They can manufacture the stuff. I'm sure they have a ton of stuff already stockpiled in terms of raw materials necessary to continue some of this underground. So I'm sure that they have that, but even that will run out at some point, and it'll be very difficult, even with Chinese and Russian help, to get things in there. That'll still be a very, very tall task for them to continue to go on. So they don't want to do that. But what they want to do is make the pain so great, I think so fast and early on, to make the West realize this is an unsustainable situation. We can't win this. We need to have another ceasefire, something like that. I think that would be their objective. But that's a roll of the dice, too, because who knows if the United States would do that, because it could make us double down. It could make us say, all right, that's it. You sank 2 of our ships. You've knocked down 15 of our aircraft. It's now full on. It's game on. We're bringing in a ground force now, et cetera. And so it could get a lot worse. And so it's a gamble for the Iranian side. And of course, that would be catastrophic for our side if we ended up doing something like that. And God help us if we go down that path. But that just shows how absurd this whole thing is, because we do not need to fire one missile for our national security. Having these missiles, the long-range missiles that Iran has, are clearly for self-defense purposes. They have never used one in an unprovoked offensive manner in 47 years of existence, and they have no interest in doing so. So we don't need to do this. And to launch this could start this cascade of events that explode out, that causes us to have to escalate, et cetera, because now we can't give in. Why put ourselves in that position that's totally unnecessary and has profoundly negative potential consequences? In my view, there is zero potential upside in launching anything. The end result, no matter what, would never be better than what it is right now. And the cost to get there could be really, really high, both blood and treasure.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because, with these conversations, especially with military analysts like yourself, I try to keep the conversation bracketed to could, and what the coulds are, and the potential outcomes, as opposed to should we do something. But I'm glad you said that, because indeed there doesn't seem to be any sort of geopolitical necessity to taking such action. But you said something interesting there with respect to Iran losing a war of attrition. And that's something I don't often hear, is that oftentimes people say, well, in a war of attrition, Iran would actually endure. But I would have to agree that they're under so much economic pressure right now, and climactic pressure with the water shortages and all of these compounding, coalescing crises that they're currently facing at the same time. They're not in a very advantageous position for the long term. So you said something very interesting, that you think right out the gates they need to make a very big deterrence statement, knowing full well that being surrounded, China's got their own problems, Russia clearly has their own problems. What do you think that would look like? I mean, because I personally think if they sink an aircraft carrier, I almost feel as though there's an invitation to do that at this point, because you're seeing these satellite images of all these planes close together. It's almost like bait. It's almost like we want them to strike us, so then we can have our Pearl Harbor moment and our justification for a ground invasion.
Yeah, there actually is, I think it's this morning, there's a piece in Politico to where some senior American officials are being quoted as saying that there is discussion within the administration that, it would be really great if Israel started this and launched this, because then that would, and then Iran attacked us, because then that would give us justification at home to say, hey, we have to go to war now. It would make it easier, as opposed to a war of choice that we start. That's a lot more difficult. So it sounds like some people are already thinking that way in the United States.
You were in the Iraq War in 2003, and I was doing a little bit of research last night, and I'm not sure if you can kind of corroborate this or not, but apparently it took them around 2 months to deploy like 150,000 troops to the region. What is the logistical viability at this point of, like, if they say they suddenly wanted to do like a ground campaign after whatever it is they're about to do, how long would that take to assemble?
Yeah, I was actually in the Pentagon during the Operation Iraqi Freedom, the opening phase in 2003. I was subsequently deployed there years later, but that's where I was, which means I had a front row seat to all of that logistic problems that you're talking about there. I've been there since September, I think, of 2002. So I kind of saw all that in the process and helped process a lot of it. So it would take many months to get ready for that kind of an operation. In the event of the March 2003 war, I mean, we had already started a lot of the preparation in August of 2002 and in July of 2002. Many people foresaw that, and there was a lot of actions that had been started even back at that point here. Then you had prepared deployment orders. You had all kinds of people that understood what was going on. They started stockpiling key logistics areas, et cetera. Now, maybe that's been going on again to some level. We haven't seen any public announcements of it. But to change to go down that path from flat-footed with no preparation at all, which it appears in large measure we have, to say, oh, now we have to go in on the ground. You've got to start that process and then go on a crisis mode, and everything will be, condensed, and everything will be going, you won't do all the follow all the normal procedures, which means things will be done, forgive this phrase, half-ass, just because that's what you got to do. You got to go with what you got to go. But it would still take many months to get all the troops assembled. You've got to get the equipment assembled. And in Desert Storm, I was in an armored unit at that time, and we went from Germany and deployed to Saudi Arabia. Then we went into Kuwait and all that. So I was personally part of that. Now I saw from that order, which came to us in November of let's see, that was November 1990. And then we were on the ground and ready to go by February. So that, about 4 months of really intense periods. And that means we had all kinds of transport, airplanes transport, ship transports. We got our stuff to the port. So you can do that pretty quick. But here's the thing. We had an army of 750,000 in 1990. Now we've got about 450,000. So we've got a whole lot less combat power now than we did then. And you're talking about you would have to deploy, I would say, like 75% of all of our deployable combat power, because we just don't have that much to even have a viable chance to go in on the ground. It would just be insane. And that means that you are now vulnerable everywhere else in the world, because that would take nearly all of it. So that's something, that's a road we definitely don't want to go down.
And you don't think there's any indications that they're preparing for anything like that at this point? Nothing overt anyways?
I haven't seen anything. I've got a few friends that are deployed, in various places in the military, and no one has reported any active movement other than just conversations.
So it looks then that whatever it is they're planning, at least for the time being, as far as we know, is going to be a sort of standoff air campaign.
Yeah, an air and missile campaign.
Right. John Mearsheimer recently suggested that he thought that Iran getting nuclear weapons would be a good thing because it would bring some strategic stability to the region. What is the prospect that Iran makes a run for the bomb when this thing kicks off, if they don't have it already? Because right now they're kind of an ambiguous nuclear state. They don't really know. I think they probably have some pretty good intelligence, obviously, that we don't know. But they have to assume that there's a possibility they already have a nuclear weapon and factor that into the calculus. And if they do feel existentially threatened, then they might actually use it in a all-out bolt of the blue attack. So what are your thoughts on the Mearsheimer statement, and what is the potential for us to see some kind of nuclear escalation here?
Yeah, I've actually had John on our show on a regular basis, and he and I have talked about that on our show before. And he has often said that he's puzzled as to why Iran hasn't already gotten the nuclear bet. He said, if it was me, if I was in there, I would have said, that's the only thing that can guarantee our security, a la North Korea. That's the reason why they are relatively safe. And he said, that's the one thing that prevents people from doing things to you, is you have this nuclear deterrent. So he said, I don't understand why they don't. But at least so far, they haven't had it. And I'm not sure I would go so far as to say that they should have that would bring stability. I mean, there is a certain logic to it, because if they had one, if they had demonstrated the capacity like the North Koreans did, then everything, all of our calculations would radically change. And unless we're ready to go to a nuclear war, and meaning receive nuclear weapons on our either on our country or on our assets in the region, that would obviously really change things up. But much better, I would say, is to let's just not be stupid, and let's don't go down a path that would push them in a position, if they haven't, to want to race to a bomb. Because that's one of the things that has been my concern that I talk about for many years now, is that we claim we don't want Iran to have a bomb. That's why we claim we got out of the terrible decision in 2018 to get out of the JCPOA, where we had some serious constraints on them. And I said, we're doing everything in the world to push them into it. The very thing we claim to want to avoid at all costs, we're giving them every reason in the world to do that. If you go down this path and we get this strike, and it turns into a campaign, as many are saying here in the United States, then we do give them every incentive to do so. And because we've seen that they've shown us these incredible underground facilities, we have no way of knowing at all if they've been building additional centrifuges. I had MIT professor Ted Postal on our show a few months back, and he was talking about how actually after the 2025 strike, he said, listen, we may have blown up a lot of stuff in there. He said, but here's what it would take to actually have another facility somewhere else. Once they got that 60% enriched uranium to a safe location, which presumably they did, he said they could set up another relatively small scale. And he categorized how big that it would be. And he said they could set up new centrifuges, and they could get that to bomb grade material. And within a few months, they could have enough material for, at least I think it was 3 or 4 nuclear warheads, he said. Which means in those areas that we know that they have somewhere, out of sight of everybody, out of range of any kind of the ability to test air or whatever, sensors to find out if they have it, we wouldn't even know. And it could be that you're in the middle of this campaign, you're in the middle of this bombing, and then all of a sudden we see a seismic event, and they have proven and detonated a nuclear warhead, in an underground facility somewhere. And then they announce that they have, made it to a missile of some sort. That's the nightmare scenario that we could start. That's not part of the conversation here. But logically speaking, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for them to do it. Now the Ayatollah has consistently said there's a fatwa against this. It's not in our interest. We don't want to do it. They have some logical, some less logical reasons that they don't want to. But there is also a lot of voices in Iran that says they should, and they've been advocating for that. And in the event that they start getting blown up and it's going after regime change, those calculations internally could change a lot.
Yeah, we've had Ted Postal on before, and indeed he seems to, his take on things seem to contradict what the administration is saying and what J.D. Vance said yesterday, that they're still pursuing a nuclear weapon, and that, well, what Trump said, that how they were all destroyed. Obviously, there's major contradiction there. I guess, people talk about how, well, they're going to start building the bomb if they feel existentially threatened. But, I mean, the way that these things progress, I mean, we've seen how fast, things could have potentially fallen apart during the 12-day conflict. I mean, is it even practical for them to be able to put something together once this war is in motion? Like, I could see this being a very multi-pronged, multi-spectrum attack from all angles, using every possible asset in the region, possibly even like sleeper cells on the ground. That's going to be a big component. So isn't it too late if the shooting starts to initiate that process of doing the seismic testing? I mean, is there going to be a government at that point that can facilitate all that?
When your life is on the line, you can do a lot of things that you don't think you can do in a normal peacetime situation. And I just want to reinforce the idea. of the vast size of the Iranian country, how big it is, how many of these facilities they have, how they're spread out all over the place. The military task for us to succeed to destroy all these things is profound, much more difficult than it's being characterized in the Western media, especially if you talk about a lot of these pro-Trump administration news outlets or whatever. They make it sound like it's going to be easy, and I guarantee it's not. President Trump had this Truth Social that says, oh, General Kane told me that it's actually going to be easy to take out Iran. There's no truth to that whatsoever. I don't know if General Kane actually said that, but I can guarantee you that it's wrong. Whoever said it, whether it was Trump alone or anything else, there is no truth to that. It is a very, very difficult task. So we can throw a lot of missiles downrange. We can throw lots of bombs. We can shoot a lot of ordnance and blow up all kinds of stuff on the surface. But I can't reinforce enough. They are prepared for this. They have allocated a lot of resources over years precisely for this outcome. So in the event that happens, they have the ability to continue manufacturing weapons and other things that they need to live underground, et cetera. So they can weather this storm, I think, and they're prepared to do it.
Yeah, the expression on Kane's face when Trump was making those statements at the State of the Union didn't seem to inspire a lot of confidence. I think it seems like there's a bit of a difference of opinion there in terms of what we're being told publicly. What about the prospect of Israel or the United States potentially utilizing some sort of tactical nuclear weapon? This is something that's been floated around. What do you think would be the threshold for nuclear use for Israel or the U.S.? I'm sure they could provide some sort of argument as to why they had to do it, or why it's the only way they could have targeted these deep underground military bunkers. It's because Iran has to factor that into their equation, that while they have to make a statement out the blue, that they don't potentially put Israel at existential risk, because they know exactly what Israel will do, which will be to leverage their Samson option. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do worry about that. And I would imagine, putting myself in the Iranian position, that's something you would have to be carefully calibrated to try and figure out. If someone has executed an operation that's specifically designed to destroy your government, to kill you personally, you're going to be pushing right up against that envelope, because you're going to realize you got nothing to lose. Because if you don't push hard enough on that envelope and you lose out, then you're going to die anyway. So why not worry about risking whether there might be a nuclear escalation on the other side? You're going to try to find that sweet spot, I guess, because I think that they would be watching very carefully. And if a lot of their missiles kept on getting through, and it started causing some real problems for the Israeli side, especially, I think that there's a bigger risk that the Israeli side than the U.S. side would do. So if it turned out that you're hitting economic targets, and you're starting to devastate their ability to even have a functioning economy, and all of a sudden the Israeli side starts to calculate, okay, this is just not going to work. We can't do this. Now we can't have a ceasefire like we did in 2025. So it's time to pull out the Samson option, as you call it. That is a very real prospect. That's why they have it. And I promise you, there's plenty of people inside of Israel, inside of the government, that say, hey, there's a reason we have these things. This is one of those times. So I do not at all discount that possibility. And another reason why we should not, under any circumstances, get into a war with Iran, because that's another unintended consequence that could get out of anyone's control.
Yeah, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett today said that we know as a fact that in Pickaxe Mountain, which is the next Natanz, they're rebuilding enrichment capabilities as we speak. So we've heard about this Pickaxe Mountain. I first heard about it on Fox News a few months ago. It seems that this is now in the crosshairs, that this might be the next place where we see some fireworks, so to speak. Do you know anything about that situation?
I don't know it by name. I had not seen that by Naftali, but I know he's been the biggest advocate outside of Netanyahu for the destruction of Iran for years and years, and certainly all since 2023, 10/7. But I had not seen anything that this Pickaxe Mountain, hadn't seen that specifically named either, other than Ted Postal saying that it's likely they would form some kind of a capability somewhere. Maybe that's it. I don't know if that's really intelligence or it's just a misinformation that the Israeli side is using to justify going after it for some other reason. Both of those things are possible. It could be either. I just don't know.
So you wrote a book called The 11th Hour, and this is the last question I'll ask you because we're going to have a busy day, both of us. And you talked about the U.S. being on the brink of losing its preeminent global hegemon status. Are we closer to the 12th hour since you wrote that book? And what sort of knock-on effects could a war in Iran have for the situation in Eastern Europe as well as China?
Yeah, I'm actually in the process of writing an updated of that's called 11. I think it's 1159 in 2026 America. So yes, I think we have escalated beyond that. We are in a worse situation than we were when I wrote that before the 2020 election. And listen, I mean, if we get into a war with Iran, we will accelerate that and enter into a period of time where we could operationalize my fear. Because as I said, if we get into a situation to where we feel like we have to go in on the ground and we order a ground invasion, you're going to have almost all of our deployable forces. And we're going to have a lot of help from our European colleagues too. We can't do this one alone. You can't go in just on the ground with the United States. And then you also have this issue where the Europeans are already saying, well, we have to get ready for a war with Russia in 2027, 2030, somewhere around there. And they're trying to get their forces built out there too. You can't do everything. And if you get into here, then what are you going to do with the Ukrainian situation? Now, all of a sudden, even though we haven't been given anything to Ukraine, we've been selling it through NATO to them. But now then that'll stop. I mean, 100%. That will go completely cold. All of it will go into the Middle East. In fact, even if we don't go on the ground, nearly all of it, certainly the missiles and the offensive missiles are going to go into that area. So what's that going to do to Ukraine right there? That could give Russia a green light to move forward there. If we are seen to have lost, and in my view, we already have lost the war in Ukraine. It's a foregone conclusion. The only question is how much longer is it going to take, and what is the final death toll on the Ukraine side? But it's over. So that wasn't on the table in 2020 when I wrote that. So now then we're going to have to figure out how to avoid or how to deal with that loss already. And if you add in another one that we can't win at an acceptable cost here, I mean, you're further deteriorating our capabilities. And we're already seeing now Russia is a much more powerful land force than the United States is, which was not the case in 2020. China has been paying a lot more attention to this over on their hemisphere. And so they have learned the lessons that Russia learned the hard way in 2022 about how they weren't ready to sustain a war industrially with their industrial capacity and their ability to make missiles, drones, artillery shells, and several other key armaments of war. They apparently have learned that and have now stepped up and make it. Their shipbuilding capacity is 230-something times greater than the United States, so that they get into a naval war, they can sustain that. We can't even come close to matching what they could do. So we can't get into a sustained war with China under any circumstances and do anything except lose. So we're weaker in all of these places, and this will only accelerate our weakness.
All right, guys. So 11... I guess what will the book be called? 1159?
Yeah, I think it's that one was 11th hour in 2020 America. This one is going to be 1159 in 2028 America.
All right. Well, I look forward to that. And I'm sure, as most people know, you have a YouTube channel self-titled Deep Dive.
Yeah, the Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube.
Yeah. So, guys, go check them out. I will post the link in the description below. Thanks for coming out, and look forward to talking to you again.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.